name is Grace Caesar. I'm going to read the words to the word today from 1 Samuel 27. We can read together. Then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand." So David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Akish the son of Maok, king of Gath. And David lived with Akish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Naboth's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. Then David said to Akish, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of the country towns, and I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?" So that day Akish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up and made raids against the Gerushites, the Gazites, and the Amalekites. For these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt. And David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Akish. When Akish asked, "Where have you made a raid today?" David would say, "Against the Negeb of Judah, or against the Negeb of the Jerahimites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites." And David would leave neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, thinking, lest they should tell about us and say, "So David has done." Such was his custom all the while he lived in the country of the Philistines. And Akish trusted David, thinking, "He has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel, therefore he shall always be my servant." That's the word of God.
Thanks be to God indeed. I'm used to stand at the back, so I'm tempted to tell you to turn that way so that you still remain behind you. But you shall try and see how this works when someone is standing up front. I'm not used to it, because the back is not much right. Jeroge Kemani is my name. Many know me as Peter. And I thank the Lord for the opportunity to stand here and break the word with us and share gospel with us. I want to ask your friend, when desperate times comes, should you always turn to desperate measures? But before you answer that, let's pray. We gather at your table, the meal served, ready to eat. Feed us by your word, Jesus. Help our hearts and keep us awake and aware of our sin, and therefore help us to fight them, and our mistrust especially, and help us to trust in you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Believer, what do you do when you face persecution? What would you do if mkono ya serikali, you all know it's not a shorthand, mrefu, was hunting you down to kill you, and you surely know that you're innocent? Would you stay back and trust that God will protect you? Or will you run for your life and seek asylum or seek refuge elsewhere? Put yourself in a practical situation. Don't imagine so much. Practicalize it and make yourself fit in that space. the government has given an order, directive order. John Swekenyi wanted. And a prize is hanged for him. Whoever gets him, bring him to the king. So the king himself can kill him. How many of us would sit and say like, this is a good, this looks like a good game. Let's play this game. Let me do the hide and seek a little bit with the government and see how far they can stretch this game. Or will you be on your next flight out of the country? What will you do? There's a next flight there. This side seems to, let's wait and see the game. Before us today is a case where the government is continuing to pursue, or Saul continues to pursue the chosen servant of the Lord in order to kill him. Last Sunday, we left it where David was hiding in the hill of Hikariah, and Zivite blew his cover. They passed the intelligence to Saul, who gathered his men very fast to go after David. And they say, as they say, mkono serikali ni mrefu, indeed, David learned at first hand. Anywhere he seems to hide within the territory of Israel, Saul is coming after him ruthlessly and mercilessly. Aware of this reality, David thought in his heart, should I stay and hope that the Lord will continue to protect me? Or should I flee for my life from this fire-breathing soul? We will see that David opts not to stay, but to do the otherwise, to run for his life and not trust God's protection. He sought asylum in the enemy's territory. Interesting. The Philistine has been constantly fighting these guys. Is there a least place that you expect David to be running to? But why he seeks asylum? And he stays there, and he stays, and as he stays there, he doesn't only stay among them, but also crafts means. Should we call them wise means? Should we call them cleverly means? Should we call them survival tactics? Should we call them ujanja? But whichever I want to call it, he crafts one of them, one of these things, ujanja policy, and he tries to deceive the king of Gath that he is attacking his people, and he is attacking the people of the Philistine. Does that whet your appetite enough of what's coming ahead of us? A drama upon a drama is coming upon us. Ahead of us, sorry. But before we get there, maybe you are those people who want to get the main idea stated clear, the banner raised up high. Here it comes. During desperate times, the Lord's chosen servants sometimes compromise their identity and resort to desperate measures that places them in dangerous position where it's only God can rescue them. A paragraph there, sorry. But just say, to make it very simpler for us, desperate times does not always call for desperate measures. Is that easier? Leave a sentence alone and a paragraph alone. Stick with the easier one. Desperate times does not always call for desperate measures. I'll be dealing with chapter 27, jump 28. Pastor Fidel will come and do the sorcery part. I'm not, don't have experience with that. I'm not experienced in that angle. I'm not saying anything. I'm just giving my, where am I preaching? 27, jump 28, and connect with 29, and call it a day. I'll divide my text into three broader sections. I'll look for chapter 27, 1 to 7, where I've said the Lord chosen servant's faith waver, and he runs away to exile. Then I'll look at 8 to 12, or literally jump 28 up to verse 2. I don't want to get to myself into a problem. I'll keep after verse 2 of 28. However, the Lord's chosen servant compromises his identity and resorts to desperate measure. And then chapter 29, I'll break it together. The desperate measures praises the Lord's servant in a dangerous position, and only the Lord delivers him. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 27, verse 1 to 7. The Lord's chosen servant's faith in Yahweh wavers, and he runs away and lives in exile. At the end of chapter 26, if you are with me, and go to verse 25, we saw Saul blessing David and speaking highly of him. But by now, David, and you and I, as you know, this drama is going to unfold, David knows Saul's words are nowhere to be trusted. Unless your head is going south, experience between Saul and David, David is aware that this word of this gentleman is nowhere to be trusted. He has praised him earlier. He has tried to this mechanism of telling David how righteous he is in saving his life. But later, no sooner had he finished, he had resorted in pursuing David again. It's a matter of time. And when Saul will get opportunity, he will strike David. Therefore, Saul's word did not mean anything to David. Hear what verse 25 says. Then Saul said to David, "Blessed be you, my son David." Your son, and you're trying to kill him. You will do many things, and you will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. Such a trustworthy, compelling, cunning words to make you believe and trust that we are now made peace with you. But David does not buy into this trickery. In 27, as we start 27, we get to hear the contemplation of his heart. He says that one day, let's read verse 27, chapter 27, verse 1. Then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than I should escape to the land of Philistine. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer, and within the border of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand." Those are David's contemplation of the heart. He's talking to himself and trying to analyze the situation. SWOT analysis, if you're a business person, is what he's doing. Strengths and opportunities, weakness and threats. And where should I... We are doing the engineers here. Engineers don't know about SWOT analysis. Thank God, so again, you don't understand SWOT analysis. He's trying to do a kind of a SWOT analysis of a situation and try to see where does this lead him in all this scenario. He says that I shall perish by the hand of Saul. What he had said earlier when his servant Abishai had told Saul that let me drive one spear and this man shall perish. He had told Abishai in 26:10 that one day he shall perish in the battle. And that reality now faces him. He no longer sees Saul perishing, but he sees himself as the one who shall perish. He is now convinced that the same fate that he had thought of Saul awaits him, and therefore he should escape to the land of Philistine, where Saul would despair of seeking him. And verse 4, true to his thoughts, the author tells us David succeeds. Verse 4 says, and David when it was told of Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. He knows that Philistine and Israel don't have a good brand. And Saul can't jump to the other territory of Philistine to go and seek him. So, like to his word, he gets off. Verse 2 tells us that he not only contemplates, it's not just a matter of contemplating in his heart, but he left the land of Israel. He left the land of Israel and together with his 600 men and his family off to the land of Philistine. He doesn't go to any place in Philistine, but he chooses Gath. Reason? I don't know. But earlier, maybe to try to shed more light to it, earlier in chapter 21, Maturi was handling that big chunk. Maybe you may have missed it. Earlier in chapter 21, verse 10 to 15, we saw him fleeing to Gath and pretending to be a madman. Remember that incident? That he was drooling? He was this crazy madman. He was fleeing at the same place. Again, he was learning from Saul. The first time, he was alone. But this time, he had a whole battalion with him. This time also, he does not act mad. This time, numbers are in his favor. He offers free security to Akish, the king of Gath. In return, he would give him a place to stay away from Saul. And in verse 5 to 6, we see him bargaining with Akish to be given another place to live in with his people because he did not want to live in the palace with the king. Yet he wasn't a Philistine, or these people who are supposed to live in the Philistine territory. We see him trying to throw very convincing and persuasive words to the king there. He tells the king, if I have found favor in your eyes, if I have found favor. After all these years of offering security, this man must have found favor in the eyes of the king. Let a place be given me in one of the country towns, that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? Why? It's not right. Let me go away from you. Many things out of that is happening. He's looking for an excuse to be away from the king so that he can, as we see later, he can be able to actualize his mechanism of living in Philistine. He wants the king to have his space. Sounds very okay. If who invites you today to live with him in State House, it's very high for you if you're insecure. You need somewhere maybe outside, maybe Nakuru. You need to be in the Nakuru Palace or Nakuru State House. That's a place where you can have your space. Let the king have his space. Sounds a very glamorous idea for the king. The king gives in. Why not have a big land? Take off Ziklag, have it. David and his men finally settles in Ziklag. Maybe for the first time after being on a run for a while, they're able to sleep and have an evening without looking back at their shoulders while they are being followed. Because they know, so for sure, is not coming anywhere, the land of Philistine. He knows how this man has tormented and become a thorn in the flesh. He can't dare bring himself and be humiliated here. So at least for the first time, these gentlemen are having a place to lay their head. Everything looks glamorous and good, awesome. David, this clever guy. When things are off their hands, look for an alternative B. Always have a plan B, is it? So you all say that. Always have a plan B. If plan B fails, in those strategic meetings, one of the questions that is usually asked, what if this fails? And plan B should always be there. Is it? You seem to doubt my plan B. David has a plan B. David's soul has become a problem. You not play this hide and seek game again. This guy you cut my life short. Plan B is Philistine. But David's contemplation to turn to the land of Philistine rather than to Yahweh for his security was wrong. Altogether a mistake. This was not the first time that David's life hung on a balance. Yet the Lord always protected him. In the earlier chapters we have come through, from the chapter 23 to 26, we have many incidents, or we have seen many incidences where God had protected David from and assured him time and again of his kingship and protected him from the hand of Saul. Just to pick a few, chapter 23, verse 14, when the men of Keilah, the very people who David saved from the Philistine, wanted to surrender him over to Saul, the Lord protected him and his men and allowed them to escape. And verse 14 says, God did not give him in his hand, in Saul's hand, if you like it. But it's good to note that God did not give him. So it's God who protected them. Kedah was across town and was across city. So when Saul had that in Kedah, he was very happy because he knew there is no escape here. These are mine, and they have been captured themselves. But God delivered him there. 23:17, Jonathan, his covenant brother, reminds him that he will be the king over Israel. And even Saul knows it. This is an assurance. He tells David that I know you will be the king of Israel, and I'll be second to you. And my father Saul knows it. It's God at work all through and through. 24:20, after David had spared Saul's life, Saul affirmed that he will surely be the king. Verse 20 reads, and now, behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Interesting, because this guy, his son, should be the king. But by God's working in his heart, he affirms and confesses that you, David, not Jonathan, my son, shall be the king. God's reassurance upon the kingdom and establishment of his kingdom upon him. And the verse and the line we read last, after sparing his soul second time, Saul again blesses him. So God's protection over him was clear. All through and through, we have seen God protecting him from danger. And also God through different people has reminded David of his destiny. He shall be the king over Israel. Despite that I'm in danger from within and without, God does not want that promise of assurance to leave his chosen servant. His freeing to the land of Philistine was an act of faithlessness in God. It was an act of mistrust and unbelief in God. Pressures of life had cost faith in God to waver. And instead of believing that God was able to keep him in Israel, as he had done before, he turns to Philistia for help. He wanted to trust his own tactics rather than Yahweh, who has protected him through and through. Verse not at all. Verse 8 to 28, verse 2. He compromises his identity and resorts to desperate measures, and that places him in a desperate position. After they settle among the Philistines, in verse 8, David and his men start raiding the traditional enemy of God's people. Like you and I would wake up every morning in different hustles you do to go and look for a bread. They wake up and go to look for something for their family. And raiding was one of the times things they would do for provision. And David would wake up and go with his men and raid against Geshurites and Gizrites and Amalekites. This was contrary to Akish's expectation, to King of Gath expectation, because it was supposed to be his machinery working for him and not backbiting him. Your machinery doesn't work against you. It's a force that works for you to execute your missions, whatever you want them to be done. And after he raids, he leaves no survivor. Verse 9 says, David will strike the land and leave neither man nor woman alive. But he will take the spoil back to Akish to continue cementing his loyalty to him. Verse 10 and 12 will give us a better understanding of verse 9. But even before we jump to 10, 11, we see an interesting scenario here. He's not living with Akish in the palace, but he's living in Ziklag. But every time he makes a raid, he is very careful to go back to Akish headquarters and share the spoil with him to continue farming. Mse, tuko pamoja. I'm your right-hand man. I'm trustworthy. What a dramatic irony is here. You and I know he's raiding the Geshurites and the Gezerites and the Amalekites. But later, David's response would be amazing when king asks him of the question I have been reading. But he is trying to go back again and again to Akish to ensure that he still wins his loyalty. Verse 10 captures the conversation between David and Akish. After receiving the spoils, of course, like you and I would be interested to know, hii imetoka wapi? You would want to ask your child, na hii umetoka wapi? Or your machinery, na hii umetega wapi? Where have you made a raid today? What do you expect David to say? Suppose you don't know what follows. What would be the expectation of what would David say when the king asks, where have you gotten this from? Talk the truth. Among the Geshurites, among the Amalekites, among the Gezerites, have been out there looking for sport for you. You should be clapping for me. The truth is, but unfortunately, our guy, our hero, the Lord's chosen servant, fails us terribly. He answers the king against the Negeb of Judah, against the Negeb of the Jeremites, against the Negeb of the Canaanites. For we are looking at verse 10. You can see it there. All these territories, maybe for those who are wondering what Negeb is, just south. Just keep it south. The word means south. South, all that region was south of Israel. So he's raiding in the southern region of Judah, of Jehemites, of the Canaanites. All these territories are in Israel. And sorry, I didn't have a map. I wish I had drawn that to the media team. Ziklag is next to Israel. It's at the border. It's like geography people. Which is the nearest town next to Kenya? Jinja. Which side is that now? Uganda, Tanzania? Okay. Let's talk of Namanga. Namanga is easier for many of us. Ginger, I have no clue. Is ginger for food or ginger for a place? Let's talk of Namanga at the border. Ziklag is on Tanzania's side, and the Kenyan side is Israel. So it's right next to the Israelites. So when the king he has been raiding among the Israelites, he has no doubt at all, because these are your immediate people we should be raiding against. So he's very crafty in his answers. He doesn't say of the northern side of Israel. He talks of the southern side, where he knows he will persuade the king properly. But I've been your royal guy. I've been raiding among these people. He says in 12, when the king of God hears his news, his heart is excited. Wow, what a fool do I have here? What a machinery do I have here? What a right-hand man do I have here? He is excited, super excited about this news. Verse 12, he says, and Akish trusted David, thinking he has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel. He has worked himself against, if you like it, his people. Or he has made him to smell bad before his people. Therefore, because of that, this machinery shall be my servant forever. Interesting. But this is not true. David was not raiding the territory of Israel, but among the Philistines. And that's why he left no survivor, so that no one would contradict his report. Earlier, verse 9, we are told, whenever he went for a raid, he left no survivor. Earlier, when Saul was sent to go and clear the Amalekites, it was God's command, go and wipe out all the Amalekites. None should be left alive. But these times for David's case, it's not God's order. It's his mischievous way of surviving among the Philistines. Kill all, so that no one goes and whispers anything to the king and contradicts my report. You seeing the craftiness of this gentleman? He knew if Akish knew that he was raiding his people, or he was raiding the Amalekites and the Geshurites, this would be a treasonable offense. This kaput for you. The first time they attempted to kill you, you pretended to be a madman. This time there is no escape. There will be no pretense. When I realize you are raiding my people, kaput with you. By standing with Akish again, with the king of Gath, an enemy of God's people, David compromised his identity as a king because you would be viewed as a traitor by the Israelites. They usually say, you can't have your cake and eat it. But David is proving us wrong. He is having it and eating it. He is duping the king of Gath and raiding the enemies of God. And no one is aware of this maneuver. He is having it and eating it. Interesting. This guy is crafty. You think you're wise? This here, you have one who is beating us in all odds. He plays a double game perfectly. And because he doesn't want to be found out, he resorts to deception. He is moving from pan to fire. The spiral is going downward, downward, downward. He starts by running away, showing off mistrust and faithlessness. He starts killing people to cover his steps. That's not enough. He turns again on to deception. He deceives the king of Gath that he is raiding the Philistine and he's raiding the Israelites, yet he was not raiding the Israelites. You and I would have a bigger expectation of this man to be a man of truth, to be a man who talks the truth. He is the Lord chosen one. God chose him from nowhere, and he knows that he's the next king. You and I would have a bigger expectation of David, but he's failing us terribly in all that we hold of him. All these desperate measures leave the Lord chosen one in a very difficult position. Because of managing to dupe or to deceive the king of Gath entrusts himself to him, and he makes him the bodyguard, the guard of his head, if you like it. He is the one who is guarding. Sorry, I'm finishing. Kwisha mimi. Poor me for timing myself. He has managed to dupe the king of Gath. And the king of Gath he has entrusted his life to this gentleman, and he has made him his bodyguard. All these desperate measures, because he wanted to cover his tracks in all this way, he resorted into desperate measures, and this has pressed him into a very difficult position. Akish, king of Gath, asks him, would you go with me to fight the Israelites? He is caught between a hard place and a rock. Should I say no? Should I say yes? Should I go and fight my people? Should I abstain from this fight? If I abstain, I lose royalty of the king. If I go, I lose royalty of my people as their king. Where should I choose? He is in a difficult space to make a decision. But he chooses to join the war. And you and I can start imagining Saul versus David. Footballers can start imagining those stars in football. Ronaldo versus Messi. De Bruyne versus who? Hey, watu wa Mungu. Ruto versus? Ruto versus Jacoya. And how that battle would look like. And it starts becoming kind of now a very tense mood situation. Why does this guy accept this offer? And that ushers us to chapter 29, where fast forward to chapter 29, David and the Philistines have gathered at Imperfect, that is northern now region. You have shifted region from south now to north. And the Israelites at Jezreel, near ready for war. But something happened. As the troop was marching forth before the roads of the Philistines, one of them realized, a stranger amongst us. What is a Jew doing here? Verse 3, 29 verse 3, read with me. The commander of the Philistines said, what are these Jewish Hebrews doing here? And Akish, like a good king, defended his soldiers. He said, is not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel? And since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day. What can you do if you know all that you know? I want to break in a rafter and say, poor king of Gath, this gentleman has not been loyal to you any day, a single minute. He's a thorn in your flesh, he's a bomb in waiting, ready to broth and kill you properly. What do you want to be told, dude, to stop this foolish thing of fighting against your people, your subjects? But also Akish's assessment of David shows how David had managed to dupe him and to lie him, to trick him into all this thing. Akish tells this is not longer working. David, the lords of the Philistines would have said, no, we are not going with this gentleman. These are bomb in waiting. They know that. I think by God's revelation, it helps them to see these are bomb in waiting. This guy, when you get to the battle, and it becomes hot and fierce, he will turn against us and he will squarely beat us. So no, push him away. Akish tried to argue, to offer, let's do this, a counter-argument. But he says no. And David has nothing else but to return. But friends, this God's working to ensure that David does not face his subject. Because these have blown him all together and has compromised him as a king that God has prepared him to be. God protect him from destroying himself, but also destroying his people. But at the same point, spoils or disappoints us from long-awaited match against Saul and David. Watu wa movie na Stalin facing the other Stalin and blah blah. Sorry, there's no war. David is not in the scene. It's Philistine versus Saul, period. Two quick things as we wrap up this. Believer or saints of God, when you face persecution, where do you anchor your faith? Do you look within yourself for help, or do you look up to God? One thing I need to take, and you can take that to bank, is persecutions or difficult times will surely come. It's not if, it's when. And they will surely come. And in those difficult times, we are most tempted to wander away from God and seek solution from within us. We are tempted to forget God's working and provision and protection and feel like the world is crumbling on us and I ought to do something urgently before things crumble and I have nothing less to take. I need to do something to rescue this situation. I need to do something to pick up this one. I need to do something to rescue 1, 2, 3. We are tempted to cut corners in order to save our lives. We are tempted to cut corners in our business in order to make an extra coin in this hard, difficult economy. Did you know that unga is at 200? Did you know that? I won't talk about fuel. Let's talk about the basic. In this difficult scenario, we are tempted to cut corners in our dealings, cut corners in our measures, in our weighing. If you're in manufacturing business, cut corner in your ingredients, cut corner here so that you can get an extra income, so that you can save your life. We are tempted to trade our confidence and hope in God for the fleeting pleasures of this world. Believer, your help does not come from within. I know that's a common philosophy in our day. But just look within, and there lies your help. Lie. Our help does not lie within us. But our help comes from Yahweh. Our help comes from God. He is a sure security on whose hand we can secure. And as Lev has reminded us in children's slots, well, the name of the Lord is a strong tower on whose righteous land to. The name of the Lord is where you ought to land during the difficult time, during the time of tribulation and desperation and uncertainty of life. And when things are not working as we thought they ought to work, we ought to learn, you ought to run to Yahweh. You ought to run to the name of the Lord and cast and anchor our faith there. Believer, saints, when you face persecution, what do you feed your heart with? What do you feed your heart with? We see David contemplation, and during these difficult times, he is feeding himself with fear. Motivation speakers has told us, has challenged us, or has told us in many days, or in a way of encouraging and motivating you, that all that you need is within you, has pushed us to turn, I can call it witchcraft of a kind, of self-help and self-therapy, and cheat and talk to ourselves, positive vibe, of course, there's positive vibe, and that's become the lie of the day. Have a positive vibe, positive vibe, positive vibe, no negative energy, bra bra. Friends, when we face tough times, the only way to keep ourselves afloat is not by harnessing our internal power, like when you do in yoga and all those things. It's by renewing our strength in the Lord. Chapter 30, we shall see David coming back to his senses when he gets back home and he finds that the people, the wives and the animals have been taken away. And you find him renewing his strength in the Lord and seeking the Lord. That's all you ought to do, friends. We ought to renew our strength in the Lord by preaching daily the gospel to our hearts, by reminding ourselves that we are failures and we have nothing good in ourselves or within us to look at. Our help is from God, who rescued us and saved us, by coming for a moment of prayer, like organized next week, to come and pour our hearts, our desperation to the Lord. Our help is not from within, friends. By putting our faith in Him, we are sure that our lives are secure, whether in this life or in death. Therefore, we do not need to run for fear, because of fear for our lives. Friends and saints of God, desperate time does not always call for desperate measures. For us who are in faith, we should anchor our faith and entrust ourselves to God. What we're reading for us, our opening psalm, he read in Psalm 56, for those who are not in yet, Psalm 56 verse 11 says, "In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me?" And that is a call of someone who have entrusted themselves to God. Who do you entrust yourself to when you face persecution? But secondly, Christ is a true David who does not compromise his identity or deceive. David was limited, skewed, fraudulent, cunning, manipulative. All those adjectives put together, you have a longer list. He was not the hero we usually idealize him to be. To cover his tracks, he was willing to do a sort of crazy thing, deceiving and killing. Although he delivered God's people from their enemy, it was temporal, only during his lifetime. And when he died, other nations would come and attack Israel. David's kingship was limited and full of shortcomings. He is not our ultimate Savior. But Christ is a perfect, eternal king whose kingdom is not temporal, but what? Forever. Christ is a perfect, eternal king whose kingdom is forever. He did not run away from suffering when he was tempted and he was tried, and you and I know he was sinless. He did not turn away from the suffering, but he entrusted himself to the Father. At Gethsemane, he prayed to the Father, saying, "My Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not I, but as you will." A man who does not turn away from the suffering. A man who went to go all the way so that you and I would enjoy the gift of salvation today as we sit here because of the sacrifice of that one man. A man did not cower because of the threats of life that was facing him, like David would cower. A man who did not give in or try to defend himself in any way, or try to do cunning or manipulative issues to avoid the circumstance of the day, but he entrusted himself fully to the Father. Friends, Christ is the true David who came to save us from sin. May we entrust our lives to him. He is trustworthy. Our lives are sure in him. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.